Welcome back. Now, it's been a tumultuous week in politics here in South Africa. President Cyril Ramaphosa is battling to contain the scandal around the robbery on his farm in Limpopo. And on top of that, the standoff with the public protector is also continuing with questions around the timing of her suspension. What can we expect this week? Well, to unpack this, we are joined by political analyst Ongama Mtimka. Thank you very much, Ongama, for your time. This was quite a busy week for the president. The past week has been quite busy for him, and a lot of people would say he cannot get out of this one as easily as some in his faction might think.
Yeah, no, the question is whether he can get out at all. The president is facing serious allegations. And I think even beyond the case that Arthur Fraser has thought was important to open, the frills around the case leave a lot more questions that the president needs to answer. So, for example, why keep such a allegedly huge amount of foreign exchange privately? And isn't that in contravention of foreign exchange control regulations? The second one is whether the proceeds, which are claimed to be of gain, were in fact declared as income and in fact taxed accordingly, among many other things which at this stage cannot be answered and addressed by a simple, declaration that these were proceeds of the sale of gain. And I think that this is the first salvo fired at the president to actually potentially stick and have implications directly on his political standing. Because all other attempts previously always had were always being, you saw how he was being framed as too much of a stretch. And I think in this instance, Arthur Fraser has come up with something that actually has potential to stick.
And in terms of how it's looking, Ongama, with the president not really being a bit evasive with giving journalists answers and in turn South Africans answers and politicians during, the sitting in Parliament this week, doesn't that also just make things worse for him? I mean, my question would be, this was a robbery that happened in 2020. So you're telling us through the presidency, etc., that we should let the law take its course and investigations continue. But when did these investigations start? Is it something that is it an investigation that started after the Fraser statement on the charges, or was it something that started in 2020? And if it started in 2020, what's taking it so long to wrap up?
The right attitude when a scandal of this nature surfaces is to bow out and allow the processes to unfold without you as the incumbent embroiling the office of the president in scandal and, in fact, your very presence creating potential limitations on the extent to which the very same institutions you are trying to build can act freely without fear and without favor. So by virtue of remaining in office faced with a scandal of this nature is a characteristic of ANC politicians and the culture they have sought to entrench in the country, that a legalistic approach to things was more important than the moral and ethical approach. So it's a bad precedent. We've seen in New Zealand, for example, a minister resign when the scandal came out publicly that they had gone partying in the beach while everybody else was on lockdown. So this idea that people can take cover from provisions about presumption of innocence until one is proven guilty is not the ideal. It's something which, is part of the culture that the ANC has been trying to entrench. And in fact, what they have done for themselves, even their own constitution doesn't favor this. Their constitution talks about, if you've been involved in acts of misconduct, and how those acts of misconduct are defined are very broad. However, when they were crafting internal institutions and mechanisms to deal with, people who've brought the party into disrepute, they brought this lowering of the bar which relates to whether or not a person has been charged in a court of law, when in fact the constitution of the party itself is more encompassing and embraces moralistic and ethical questions more than questions of whether or not you've been charged and have been proven in a court of law to have been involved in whatever claims are brought against you. I think also, Masego, one thing should be noted here is that the president is going to be, by remaining in office, he's going to be negatively affecting the very same institutions he's been trying to rebuild, even though he's got a scandal like this.
That's where I was coming to. I mean, we have to admit that so far the president's legacy, or what he's been trying to show South Africans he's trying to do, is to give power to, law enforcement agencies through, signing of declarations during state capture, commission of inquiry, etc. But, his decision last week, Thursday, to suspend with immediate effect, especially after that statement from the public protector, or the suspended public protector's office, saying that she will be investigating whether or not he went against a certain ethics code. I know it's a Chapter 9 institution, but her recommendations and investigations do have an implication when it comes to law enforcement, right? So how does it look in terms of his legacy to give power to law enforcement to investigate if he, it's just the timing. I think that South Africans do have a leg to stand on.
Yeah, so as far as I'm concerned, the public protector's office was damaged, and the reputation of that office, it was brought into disrepute by the conduct and incompetence that Busisiwe Mkhwebane showed. And when I make reference to those things, I'm not saying that there was no room to make mistakes. There's room to make mistakes. However, if you are proven by the courts to be attempting to frame cases to achieve certain outcomes, it's best for the Office of the Public Protector that this latest scandal by the president is not investigated by Busisiwe Mkhwebane, much to the contrary of what people are saying. However, that notwithstanding, I'm of a very strong view that the president cannot remain in office while he needs to be investigated on the basis of this new case by the Hawks, SIU, among others. But while recognizing that, he cannot be reckless in how he leaves office. I think he must leave sooner, but he must position a successor among the ones who are known to be keen within cabinet.
Is there a successor? A lot of political analysts we've spoken to and who've written are saying that Ramaphosa is actually the ANC's last hope.
I think we need to call the bluff in that. The ANC, if they cast their eyes wide enough, it doesn't lack people who can lead. Many of them felt alienated by the dirty politics and the mudsliding that's there, and the fact that people are in politics for their own self-gain, and therefore preferred to be either in government or SOEs where there was still some room for professional conduct and ethics and morality. So the fact that those people are not in the fray, and there's few of them that are, for example, in the NEC, is not the same as saying they aren't there at all. There can be no greater bluff than the idea that President Cyril Ramaphosa is the only person that can lead the ANC.
Well, just lastly, how does the future look for the president within the ANC? I mean, I know that I'm not talking only about next week as in like the near future. Wherever he's going to be in terms of inviting the media, obviously we'll try and get those questions through to him. But in terms of the future, you have the KZN elective conference taking place soon. We're hearing of them, trying to bring up the debate of the step-aside resolution and make it even more vigorous. Others are saying that he should in fact step aside. How does it look for him, going into the December conference?
So here's the thing. I wrote before the scandal came out that from a question of strategy and legacy, among other things, the president should consider not to come back for a second term. And if he loves the ideal, that is the ANC in this case, or when we were talking earlier about state-level issues, the ideal of rebuilding and renewal at a state level, he must love those ideals enough to recognize when he has become a political liability for that. So at the level of the party, why fight to become the last president, the only president in democracy, under whose guard the ANC goes below 50%? It just doesn't make sense, even judged from a personal point of view. And then second thing I was saying, if you know the ANC is being punished by people because of particularly his generation that have come into the space and despite the sacrifices that they made, have gone on to erode the very gains that we've achieved in democracy. So the best thing he can do is to force the party, the politics of the party out of his generation. I say this without any fear of contradiction. His generation is a problem. And none of the candidates, whether it be Zweli Mkhize, Lindiwe Sisulu, Paul Mashati, Gwedemanda, none of them should actually be campaigning to come back into office, because they, just by virtue of where they are, can never have a long-term approach to governing this country. They must go and rest and allow a generational shift. And my view is that the immediate next generation should be skipped. And people, for example, in the age group of Ronald Lamola, people who feel they still have to make a name for themselves through their contribution, rather than people who feel that the system is owing them because at some stage in their lives they made sacrifices which were too great and other people couldn't make them, and therefore they're entitled to continue to extract rents and resources from the system. I've had enough of those people, and I think that the time has come for South Africa to be led by people who have got a greater need to contribute now than people who feel that in the 70s and 80s they did daring acts which must continue to be rewarded.
Ongama, thank you very much for your time here on today and on eNCA. It's always good to hear your perspective of how the politics in our country are going. And of course, South Africans know it's been breaking news after breaking news this week. And Ongama is telling the president and those in his age group in the ANC to rest.